1946. We are, highly committed to providing a superior product and level of service. And, for those of you that have had some experience with us now, I'm hoping that that's what you've seen. We're very committed to that and work hard to really achieve it. So that's very important to us. I think some of that comes from the fact that we're family-owned and operated. My two brothers, my sister, and I are the principals of the company. Actually, my dad was partners with Bill Delmhorst since 1969 until the 70s, so it's been in our family for quite a long time, and we are hands-on, management and managers of the business. We specialize in moisture meters only. This is the only thing that we do. We are in different markets, but our product are strictly handheld moisture meters, and I think that also helps us stay focused and keep our quality and our service up. We're proud to say that we're still made in the USA. We have a small facility here in New Jersey where we've got engineering, production, and distribution. So, we design, develop, make, and service all of our products out of our plant in New Jersey. And this goes back to our service, but we do have a small but knowledgeable technical team. Anytime that you've got issues or questions or you want to put a customer on the phone with us to help out with a product, we're there to help. And again, we work very hard to, to really be accessible and make sure that all of your needs are met. And finally, one thing that we strive hard to keep up with is our repairs. Again, since our products are serviced here in New Jersey, it's pretty easy access, even from the West Coast. We run about 10 days turnaround on repairs, and our repair costs are between about $75 and $100, just depending on the model, but we really try to keep those reasonable as well, so it makes sense to repair a product instead of having to replace it, especially out of warranty. So that's just a little bit about Delmhorst. As far as why we use a meter, I like to talk a little bit about just the basics, in a water damage. And the first thing is we always want to go into the job to evaluate it with a moisture meter. And the reason we do that is to establish a dry standard. The dry standard is really what our unaffected areas are. So you would use the meter and find unaffected areas in the job site and then compare those readings to affected areas so that you know where you need to target, what you need to dry down to. Without a moisture meter, you really can't establish that. During the drying process, you want to ensure that your structure is being dried properly. And again, that's accomplished by checking the moisture levels every day. Doing this is going to help you see how your progress is going. It'll enable you to make smart decisions as to whether or not you need to make adjustments to the equipment that you've placed. And again, just helps you to really pace the project and see how effective the drying is. And then finally, especially with the Navigator and the Navigator Pro, you can download all your readings, which have been saved in the meter, to an Excel spreadsheet, and it verifies that the structure is dry. So, by using any meter, you're able to measure the moisture levels throughout the job. By using something like the Navigator and Navigator Pro, all of your readings are stored, time and date stamped, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but I'll show you the actual spreadsheet that comes out of the program. So you've got a hard copy of all of your data without having to manually record it. There are essentially two types of moisture meters, pin and pinless meters. And I want to spend a minute or two to talk about the differences between the two and the pros and cons and kind of what to expect when you're using a pin meter versus a pinless meter. Just looking at the first bullet, pin meters measure the electrical resistance or the electrical current between the 2 points of contact. So you insert the pins into the material, and it's actually just completing the electrical circuit. It's measuring that resistance between the 2 points. The pinless meters work using capacitance, where a signal is sent into the material, and then it kind of bounces back up into the meter and gives you a reading. Now, there are pros and cons to both approaches. If we look at this diagram, this sort of illustrates some of the benefit of each. If you look on the left side, this is the hammer probe, which some of you may be familiar with, and it's got insulated contact pins. So what happens here is the pins have a Teflon coating on them, and the tip is exposed. So you can drive these pins into different depths of material and get readings just at the tip. So if we use this cross-section, let's pretend this is actually a floor cross-section where this is the top floor and this is the subfloor. You can get readings here in the top floor and then drive down a little bit further and get readings in the subfloor. And because you're reading just at the tip, just where the pin is exposed, that'll identify differences and allow you to, again, determine if the entire flooring is dry. If you're using non-insulated pins, just like the pins that are typically on the top of the moisture meter, those are typically used for thinner material like drywall or wood that's under an inch thick. You don't get the advantage of the insulation, but you still are measuring between the 2 points. And again, with the pinless meter, you've got a signal that typically goes about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch into the material and then bounces back a reading. Excuse me. The Navigator and Navigator Pro are both, each of those meters has both types of measurement in there. So it's a scanner or a pinless meter and a pin meter as well. With each type of technology, there are things that affect your readings. And I just want to kind of go over that so we have a little bit of a sense as to what to look for and really how to take the readings that you get and qualify them and sort of understand that where there may or may not be some limitations with the information that you're getting. So with a pin meter, obviously the first thing that's going to affect your reading is the actual moisture content of the material. If you've got more moisture, you're going to get a higher reading. And that's all based on the current or the conductivity that's being measured between the 2 points. When you have more moisture in a material, kind of look at it as more water, the current is going to flow more freely, which means you're going to get a higher reading. The opposite is true. If your moisture content is lower, you'll get a lower reading on screen. So that's pretty basic. Another factor that affects the reading is the temperature of the material. Pin-type moisture meters, not just Delmhorst, but really all the pin-type meters on the market, have been calibrated at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So especially if we're dealing with wood materials, if the wood is at a higher temperature level, and we're going to see this in restoration when we have heated drying systems, the indicated moisture content also rises. And this is really important to know because the meters are calibrated at 70 degrees, if you're checking hot lumber or hot wood, you'll get a higher reading. On the Navigator and the Navigator Pro, and I'll show you this in a bit, there's a way to correct for temperature within the meter itself so that it displays the actual moisture content. If you had a meter that doesn't have that feature, they're typically supplied with a temperature correction chart. So temperature and moisture content are going to affect our readings. Another thing is just the material that you're checking. Again, because it's measuring the flow of current between the 2 points, the physical properties of the material are going to affect your moisture reading. That's why we have different scales. And again, as we'll see in a little bit, we have on the Navigator series, we offer a handful of different wood species that are typically seen in construction. We also have a drywall scale that's calibrated specifically for drywall. And also to make these meters more flexible and able to be used on other materials that might not have an actual moisture content scale, we also give you a 0 to 100 reference scale. So if you're checking a material that you don't have an actual calibration for, you can at least get comparative readings by seeing numbers that go from 0 to 100. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into the use of the meter. The final thing, and this is probably the least impactful on the meter readings, is the type of electrode that you use can affect your meter readings. There are slight variations in readings if you're using those insulated contact pins versus just the bare steel pins. But I don't put a lot of weight into this because this is probably the least significant factor that affects the readings. But again, these things are things that affect the meter readings. We've got ways to compensate for them, which we'll go through in a bit. On pinless meters, a few things also affect those readings. The surface conditions is probably one of the more important aspects that will affect the readings. These meters work best on smooth surfaces, and that's because the back of the meter or the pad, whatever is used to actually make contact with the material, really needs to make full contact with the material. So if you have a surface that's not smooth, whether it's textured paint, a textured wall, or an uneven slab of concrete, those little air pockets that's going to form are going to affect your readings. They typically will give you lower readings than what the actual moisture content is. So just keep that in mind. Surface moisture will also skew your readings. The scan type meters, even though they send a signal somewhere between a ½ inch and 3/4 of an inch, the signal weakens as it gets further into the material. So it's going to be skewed more toward the surface moisture. If you've got higher surface moisture than what's in the rest of the material, you'll get a slightly higher reading than sort of the overall of that material. And the opposite is true. If you've got, and actually a floor is a perfect example, if you've got a floor system where the wood subfloor still has moisture, but the top floor is drier, a pinless meter is not going to pick up that moisture that's below. So you keep this in mind as well, because there are some limitations to what information you're getting from a pinless meter. This is why we recommend the use of both. The pinless meter is obviously more convenient. You can cover more area in a shorter period of time. There are no holes that are made. But we really recommend that they're used as kind of your first check to identify where there might be moisture problems or hidden moisture problems. So having a combination meter is really ideal. I kind of talked about this with the flooring, but any hidden material is also going to affect your pinless reading. Things like metal studs or electrical boxes and that sort of thing in a wall may or may not affect your reading. Sometimes this pinless meter will pick that up, and sometimes it won't. So again, you kind of need to take these things with a grain of salt and use them as kind of a quick guide to where you want to go in with pins. Okay, so that's just a little background on moisture meters in general. We are going to focus on the Navigator Pro. And if we just look at the call-outs here, the guts of the meter is really centered around these 5 buttons. And you've got your up, your down, your left, and your right, and your select. The select button powers the meter on, and it also allows you to choose an option on the screen that you've highlighted by going to with the up, down, or left and right arrows. So you'll see it's very menu-driven, and when we get into these screenshots, I'll refer to it as either scrolling to or selecting an option, and that's all done with these 5 buttons. There is a digital readout. There's a lot of information sort of packed on the screen, but it's helpful because part of the beauty of the Navigator Pro is that it really gives you all the information you need about the measurement you're taking right there on the display itself. There's a connector on the side. Now, this meter does not have pins that are mounted on the top. So you've got the connector where you can connect any of our probes or any of our electrodes to measure your walls, your floor, and so forth and so on. And then you've also got the thermohygrometer attachment. So this is a removable stick. You would insert it into the top of the meter when you want to take your temperature and RH readings. So we refer to this as a 3-in-1 meter. Some people say a 4-in-1, but 3-in-1 meaning, you know, a pin moisture meter, a pinless moisture meter, and a thermohygrometer. The fourth thing would be temperature, RH, but we wrap that into one. So typically we refer to it as a 3-in-1 meter. The Navigator is exactly the same meter, except it's a 2-in-1. If you look at the top of it, it has these built-in contact pins instead of the hygrometer stick. So it's the identical meter, except it does not do temperature and RH. The rest of the presentation, I'm just going to be referring to the Navigator Pro because the Navigator really does everything that the Pro does except for the thermohygrometer. And by the way, I forgot to mention this in my last presentation, but these pins that are mounted on top are the same pins that are installed on the electrode, on kind of the standard electrode that comes with the Navigator Pro. So when you buy a Navigator Pro, you'll at least get that one probe that will attach here and has these pins on top. And those are typically used for drywall or for wood materials up to about 1 inch thick. Okay, general overview. The Navigator Pro has 2 modes of operation. One is called basic and one is called enhanced. In your basic operation, you can take pin or scan readings to establish the parameters of each job. It works very similarly to our BD2100, which is an orange meter. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's a pin meter only, but it's a very basic instrument. So the Navigator Pro in its basic mode, you know, is very simple to use. You basically set it for the material you're testing, insert the pins or scan, and you get a reading. It's not going to store any of those readings. It doesn't require you to set up a job, which we're going to get into later. So you're going to use the basic mode of the meter when you're evaluating or assessing the damage of the job, because that allows you to kind of get an overall picture as to what rooms have been affected by water damage and what materials within each room. Within basic operation, there is the pin mode, and you have the choice of a wood scale that's going to give you percentage moisture content over the range of 5 to 60% on wood materials. You've got a 0 to 100 reference scale. This is typically used if you're going through drywall into the insulation. We don't have a calibration for insulation, but you can still detect moisture by using the 0 to 100 scale. So those numbers don't represent percentage. They just represent drier to wetter. So, you know, pretty much any other building material outside of wood and drywall you could set to that 0 to 100 scale just to get an idea of, you know, drier or wetter areas. And the third scale that you can choose from in pin mode is a drywall scale that gives you percentage readout from 0.1% to 6% moisture content. This is a Delmhorst exclusive. We're the only meter company that offers a percentage readout on drywall. If you're using another manufacturer's meter, you can still use it on drywall. A lot of people talk about the wood moisture equivalent scale. Essentially, you know, you're always looking at a wood scale on the drywall, but interpreting those readings as relative. For example, if you're on a wood scale and you poke the meter into drywall and you get a reading of 20%, that doesn't mean you've got 20% moisture content in your drywall. 20% moisture content in drywall would be, you know, complete liquid. Drywall needs to be below 1% typically for it to be structurally sound and not have the you know, the environment for molds to grow. So that's really important to know and to differentiate that you can use a wood scale on drywall, but you need to take those readings as comparative readings only. In the basic operation, you also have a scan mode where you can just scan the materials like we talked about before. And those readings will display from 0 to 300, again on a reference scale only. So when you're scanning material, that's not giving you a percentage readout. It's just giving you an indication of drier to wetter areas. Earlier when we talked about that dry standard, this is very important to sort of get a handle on, because what you want to do is find an area that's been unaffected. And I use my office as an example. I've got wallpaper in my office. If I put a Navigator Pro in scan mode up against the wall, I usually get a reading of about 54. But it's dry. If I go out into the hall where there's just a painted wall, I get a reading of about 30. So just within the same building, two different wall surfaces are giving me two different, quote, dry standards. So it's really important when you go into your job to establish, what your dry standard is for each room in the job, depending on what the wall covering is. But again, recognizing that you're not getting a percentage readout, you're getting a relative indicator. So if I've got 54 or 55 as my dry standard, and then I go to an area and it reads 260, we know that there's something going on in that area of 260. And that's where you go in with your pins and try to identify exactly where the moisture is coming from. In the enhanced operation or the enhanced mode, you can set up to 5 separate jobs in the meter. So you can run 5 jobs simultaneously. You can activate up to 32 different rooms in each job. You can designate the material for floor, wall, and ceiling in each room. So if we go back to the beginning where we've sort of assessed the damage in basic mode, if we see that there's 3 rooms that have been affected, we'll activate 3 rooms in the enhanced mode, and then we'll indicate on the meter what material we're testing for your floor, your wall, and your ceiling. And that's really what makes this meter unique, because it gives you all of that flexibility and all of that information that you can separate out. And it stores up to 1,500 readings. So among 5 jobs, you've got about 1,500 readings that you can store. And finally, in the enhanced operation, you can view your stored readings on screen, on the moisture meter itself, or download them to a PC with the optional software so that you can generate an Excel spreadsheet. The third mode on the Navigator Pro, and it works pretty much the same in basic or enhanced, is the thermohygrometer. It measures temperature and RH. It calculates your GPP, your grains per pound, and your dew point. And it also displays all 4 of those values on screen. So whenever you're in the thermohygrometer, you're going to see temperature, RH, GPP, and dew point all together on the same screen. Also has a fast response time. We know this is important, especially with the thermohygrometer, because the more waiting you have to do to get the meter to acclimate, the longer it takes to get through the job, the more money it costs. So the quick response time on the Navigator Pro is also a key feature here. Okay, so that's the overview. What we're going to do now is take a look at how to use the meter in the basic mode. So we're going to have a series of screenshots with instructions as to what to do. When you power the meter on, it should come up from the factory in the basic menu. And you see you've got 6 options. 1 is scan, 2 is pin, 3 is RH and temperature, 4 is enhanced, so it just flips you to the enhanced mode. 5 is default, which allows you to reset the default settings. Excuse me, and 6 would power the meter off. So the first thing we want to do, if we follow that screen, is we want to take scan readings in the basic mode. So from that menu, we're going to highlight scan and press the select key. The scan sensor is located in the area that's circled in the photo down below. So the back, kind of the head of the meter on the back of it is where the scanner is. Again, just to point out a couple of differences between ours and really the GE products, because this is what it's competing with most directly. The GE has a bump out on the back of its meter for the scanner. Ours is a flat surface. We found that the flat surface allows you to have more consistency in just pressing it flat up against the material that you're testing, whereas the bump out, because you can put it on the material at different angles, you're going to get different readings depending on the angle it's at. So we felt that the flat surface is going to provide you with more consistency. The downside with the flat surface, just keeping in mind, is it's a little bit less comfortable in the hand to push it up against the wall or down on the floor. You don't have as much sort of leverage because you don't have that bump out to give you space to hold on to the handle as easily. But again, we felt that the consistency in the readings was a little bit more important. Basically, to take a reading, you're going to just press the back of the meter against the material that you test, and you want to be careful not to drag it along the surface. And this isn't because it's going to damage the meter. It's more because you want to pay closer attention to the material that you're testing. Avoid scratching it or doing any damage to a wall covering. When you enter into the scan mode, this is the screen that you'll get. So in big letters it says scan mode. There's a number, and again it'll be from 0 to 100. There's this dry to wet indicator, which is just another visual that kind of fills up, or it's almost like a barcode, not a barcode, like a bar graph that fills up as you get higher readings. Excuse me. You'll also notice the alarm, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But this meter does have an alarm that you can set to go off at a certain number. So this is really what it looks like on screen. If you've found a reading that you want to save, not save, but hold, you press the select key, and you'll see the word hold in the screen will pop up. That'll freeze the reading on screen. So if you need to manually record that, it'll freeze it on screen, and you can write it down. And then if you press the select key again, you release the hold, and the meter's going to start reading again. It'll start scanning again. To take pin readings in basic mode, we're going to go back to the main menu. We're going to choose number 2, which is pin mode. And then this is the screen that comes up. So you see a difference. It actually says MC, and there's a % sign after that number. So you're getting a percentage readout on most of the materials that you test here, flooring, wood and drywall especially. You can change the material. We talked earlier about how the type of material that you're testing will affect your readings. Well, even though this is in the basic mode, you can highlight the material, press the select key, and you're going to get a list of all the different materials that are incorporated into the Navigator Pro. You'll see that sheetrock is one of them. SPF is spruce pine fir that's used a lot in subfloors. We've got maple, plywood, particle board, and so forth and so on. I'm sorry, excuse me. So if you set that material, the calibration of the meter is going to change for that material. So it'll adjust its reading accordingly. We talked earlier about that 0 to 100 scale, which is just a reference or relative scale. If you choose plaster, or concrete, those are going to give you that 0 to 100 scale. What it doesn't show here is insulation. I mentioned insulation behind the drywall. If you want to test that, you would set the meter to plaster or concrete. And we really need to rename those just to reference scale, but that's what they are. So again, you enter into the pin mode. You select the material that you want to test. This is a little out of order, sorry. And then you'll get back to the moisture content screen. The other thing that you can change here is the temperature, and that's what's coming next. And this kind of goes over what I mentioned before, but as your temperature of the material increases, and again, keep in mind this is not ambient temperature, it's the temperature of the material, your resistance decreases, so the moisture content or the moisture reading will increase. So let's put that into plain English. If we've got a heated drying system and our ambient temperature is, let's say, 115 degrees, the wood may be at 115 or 105, 110 degrees. So you want to actually adjust the temperature correction on the meter to that temperature, and then it'll give you a corrected reading. Again, Delmhorst meters are the only ones that give you this temperature correction, so it's really handy with heated drying. And an easy way to get the material temperature is to just shoot it with an infrared thermometer or a thermal imaging camera. So you don't always want to assume that the material in the environment is the exact same temperature of the ambient. If you don't have an infrared thermometer, I know most people do in this industry, then you can take the ambient and use that as your material temperature, but it's not the most accurate. You know, if we want to really split hairs here, it's best to get the material temperature. And you want to be sure to measure material temperature every day, especially if you're dealing, you know, if there's a test system or any other heated drying system in that environment. You want to measure your materials before taking moisture readings to see if you need to correct for temperature. So to correct for temperature, we're going to highlight the temperature of 70 degrees, which is the default. It'll bring you into this second menu. You use your left and right arrow keys to adjust up or down, and it can be Fahrenheit or Celsius. In Fahrenheit, it adjusts in 5-degree increments. In Celsius, it adjusts in 3-degree increments. So you see you can go whatever. Let's see here, that's 105 degrees as an example. Again, keep in mind, we're not measuring temperature here. We're just correcting for temperature differences in the material. To switch between Celsius and Fahrenheit, you would just toggle on that comp temp heading, and it'll flip-flop or toggle between Celsius and Fahrenheit. When you're done, you select Done, and it'll bring you to the Read menu again. The final feature that you can set from that Read menu is the alarm. Now, you may be familiar with other meters that beep, and the beep is kind of an indicator that there's moisture there or that there's high moisture there. But the other meters on the market have an alarm that's set at the factory. On the Navigator Pro and the Navigator, we have a user-adjustable alarm, which I think is more valuable because you can set that alarm to go off at a number that directly relates to the dry standard on that job. So, I mean, let's go back to the example of my office. We've got 55 as a dry standard in one room, but 30 in another. We want to change our alarm setting to match that so that anything over 50 in my office would beep, or anything over 55, or over 30 would beep in the other area. So the alarm really means something then, and it's an alert that is not just arbitrary, but it's really going to be set at a value that means something to you. You can also keep the alarm off if you don't want to hear it, so just keep that in mind. But to change the alarm, and you'll see the screenshots that I have here are both the pin with the moisture content and the scan. But in both screens, we have the alarm title there, so you would just select that. And then it's going to bring you to this sub-menu. So you would turn the alarm on by pressing the select key, and you'll get, excuse me, a moisture content value that the alarm is set to. And then you use your left and right arrow keys to go up or down scale. So very much like the temperature correction. You'll see the consistency in the way the meter operates, you know, with all these menus and sub-menus. When you've chosen the alarm setting that you want, you select Done, and you'll go back to your read screen. Just a note here, there are default settings. So if you're on wood and you turn your alarm on, it's going to be at 15 degrees. I'm sorry, 15%. On drywall, it's going to be at 1%, and on concrete or that relative scale, it's going to be at 68. But these are adjustable. So these are just what we default them to, but again, they're adjustable. To take temperature and RH readings in basic mode, again, we want to insert that sensor to the top of the meter. We're going to choose number 3, RH and temperature, and you'll see this screen that shows all 4 values, the RH, your temperature, in the large font, the grains per pound on the lower left, and the dew point on the lower right in small font. So easy to read. It's got everything in front of you. So that covers using the meter in the basic mode. And as you see, you've got some options there. You've got the alarm option. You've got the material setting that you can change. But other than that, it's a pretty simple meter to use, and it doesn't require you to set up the jobs, and it's not storing any reading. So anytime we put a reading on hold in basic mode, it was just freezing it on screen for that moment for you to record it. It wasn't actually taking the measurement into memory. So now I want to talk a little bit about using the meter in the enhanced mode. But I have to put you on hold for a second because I need a little water. Hang on one sec.
Perfect for analyzing your data. Delmhorst was the first to introduce the RAM-type electrode. The 26.
Okay, sorry about that. In the enhanced mode, you have a different menu. So from your basic menu, you're going to choose the option that said enhanced. I think it's option number 4. And it'll bring you to what's called the main menu. So you'll see there are a few more options here. We've got scan, pin, RH, and temperature. Plus we have setup options, which I'm not going to go into in detail, but the setup options allow you to choose things like whether or not you want the backlight turned on, how many seconds you want to wait for the meter to shut off automatically if no, if there's no key entry. It allows you to set your time and your date, those kinds of things. The storage we'll talk about in a little bit. The job definition is what we're going to go into now, and the IR link, or the infrared link, is how you would download readings from your meter to a PC. Whoops, I'm going in the wrong direction. So the very first thing we want to do in enhanced mode is set up a job. So we choose number 6, and that brings us to this job sub-menu. You have the option to choose a job from number 1 to 5, assuming there have been no other jobs set up in there. And then you click on Done, and you're going to get this sub-menu, which says Create Job Number 1. And if you look, we've got a couple of options. We have residential, we have an ID number, and we have a temperature correction. The job type, residential or commercial, is essentially the same, except when we get into the naming of the rooms or the choosing of the rooms that have been affected by water damage, a residential job is going to have room listings by abbreviated room name. A commercial job is going to have a numbering system from 1 to 32. That's the only difference between residential and commercial. We're going to use residential for the purposes of training. The ID number is just another number that you can assign to the job. Some people use like a ticket number, a job work order number, or the street address of the location of the job or whatever. But it's just another way to identify job 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Pardon me. The temperature correction we talked about. You can adjust your temperature correction when you set the job up right now. I typically don't recommend it because more often than not, when you're first setting up your job, your temperature, even with a heated drying system, your temperature hasn't increased to the extent that you need to make an adjustment for it, but you can do it here. And then the last thing is the location definition, and this is really the most important thing on the screen. So if we select or click on this, we're going to see the first of, I think, 5 screens with different rooms. Like I said, the commercial job is going to have just a numbering system. This is a residential job, so you see that there's abbreviated room names: living room, dining room, kitchen, entry, rear entry, bath 1, bath 2, and so forth. We'll go through, there are 5 or 6 screens there to go through the 32 rooms. The yes or the no next to each room just means yes, it's been affected by water damage, or no, it hasn't, and you have control over that. So what you would do is highlight one of the rooms or one of the areas, and then you would use your left and your right arrow keys to turn that room on or off. Everything is from the factory is shut off, all the rooms. So your first job that you set up, you have to go through each of them to turn whichever ones you want on. So you're going to continue that for each, room and just scroll through the screens. Now within each room, you can designate the material for your floor, your wall, and your ceiling. If I just back up a minute, let's look at the living room. If I've turned the living room on using the left and right key, then I hit the center button or the select key, that kind of drills down into the living room and gives you this material selection screen. So this material selection screen you'll get for each room that has been affected by water damage. The default settings are oak for floor, sheetrock for wall and ceiling, but you can change those. So if you highlight the material, you just get into, a little sub-menu with a list of materials, and, no, I'm sorry, you don't. That was in the basic mode. All you do here is use your left and your right key to scroll through the different material names. So it's the same as we saw before, sheetrock. There was SPS, maple, birch, and so forth and so on. If a certain material within a room has not been water damaged, you also have an option that says none. So in this case, you might have the living room that had water damage, but the floor of the living room had no damage. So you're really telling the meter, by setting it up this way, exactly where the water damage is. And this is going to help you take the readings in the enhanced mode, because the meter is going to walk you through those rooms and through those materials when we start measuring. And again, I mentioned this, the default is oak for the floor, sheetrock for the wall, and the ceiling. So once you've set up your rooms and you've identified the material for each room, you scroll through these screens. Again, I think it's 5 or 6 screens until you get to the very bottom, which the miscellaneous, there's some miscellaneous rooms. That's the last screen in the room designation. So once you get to the bottom of that, you're going to select Done. It's going to bring you back to this Create Job Number 1 screen. You want to make sure that you select Done, because that's going to save everything that you've just input. If you cancel out of here, all of the room designations that you've activated they're not going to get saved. So it's important that you click on Done and then Done. So when you click Done here, it's going to bring you back to the main menu. And now we can start taking readings. So just to kind of recap, if we look, that job definition, we only looked at one room essentially, but it doesn't take long to set up the job. And this is sort of the biggest hurdle we're finding with the actual techs or the users of the meter, is just kind of getting them comfortable with setting up the job. But once they do it once or twice, they realize, number one, it's easy to do, and number two, it saves them so much time, because now all those readings that they're going to take in enhanced mode are going to be stored in the meter, and then you can download those. So it really saves a lot of time in the end. So let's start by scan readings. Again, from this menu, we're going to select Scan. It brings you to a very similar screen as we saw before, but there's more information on the screen than in the basic mode. It tells you the job that you're in. Very important, because obviously if you've got 3 or 4 jobs running simultaneously, you want to take readings in the job that you're actually at. It also gives you an indicator as to how much memory is being used. The record number below is how many readings were stored in that particular room, which I think is overkill. The memory is nice because, if that starts getting up to 75% or 80%, you know that you're starting to run out of memory for the meter. I think one of the most important bits of information here, aside from the job number, is the location. So here we're checking the living room wall. And this, again, is what makes this meter so unique, is once you've set it up, it actually tells you where you're going to take your reading. Excuse me. And that's why the enhanced mode gives you all those options. You also have the alarm status, so you can change your alarm setting. You can toggle to the pin mode with that lower left option, or you can exit out of here. But assuming we're going to start taking readings, again, the scanner is where we identified it as being before. You're going to press the meter on the surface that you're testing, and again, be careful not to drag it along the material. When you've identified, like now we're on the living room floor. We went a little bit backwards. I'm sorry about that. But let's say we're scanning the floor and we've identified a reading, and some companies will just identify the highest reading that they see. If you want to save that reading, press the center button. The word hold is going to appear on screen, and that tells you two things. Number one, it freezes the reading on screen so that you can view it. Number two, it actually saves it in the memory. If you press the select button again, the word hold is removed, and it starts taking readings again. So it just goes back to the scan mode. And sorry. The other thing that happens here is you'll see it was at the living room floor. When we saved a reading and released it, it automatically moved us to the living room wall. So again, here's, that's the whole idea behind the name of the meter, the Navigator. It navigates you, through your job. It takes you, points you in the right direction as to where you take your readings. So just to go back, we took a reading, we saved it, we released it. Now it's telling us to read the living room wall. So very intuitive. You just need to pay attention to that screen. Now, I mentioned earlier some companies will take the highest reading and save that one, but a lot of people want to take multiple readings on a surface. So in that living room floor, they might want to take 6 readings and not just one. Now, because the meter will automatically increment you to the next place, you can work around that by highlighting the location. So if it moved from the floor to the wall, we're going to highlight living room wall. You'll get this sub-screen brought up, and then you can just use your left or your right arrow keys to go back to that location that you want to test again. Click on Done, and it'll bring you back. Now, keep in mind, this procedure can be done as many times as needed. So if you need to take 12 floor readings, you just do this 12 times. And then when you're ready to move on to the next, just allow it to move to the next location, and don't manually back it out. So this all depends on how that particular restorer works. If they want to take more than one reading on a particular area, this is what they would do. To take pin readings from the enhanced mode, we're going to select option number 2. This is the screen that you're going to see. And again, you'll see that there's some really useful information here. The job ID, or the job number and the ID, the memory. Here, which is different than the scanned mode, it also gives you the material that you've selected for that location. Again, so it prompts the technician, okay, I'm testing oak, it's the living room floor, and it's job number 1. So the meter is telling you exactly where you need to be. If you're not in the right job, you exit out of here and go back into job definition and just choose the right job number that you need to be in. You can also select your temperature correction here. To take a reading, you're going to push your pins into the material that you're testing. Press the select key, and the meter will start its read cycle, and you'll start seeing numbers. And you can probe as many times as you want without storing a reading. As soon as you press the hold key, like we did in the scan mode, that's going to save that reading not only on screen, it's going to freeze it on screen, but it'll save it in the memory. So just bear in mind that until you've pressed that center button, no reading has been saved. It's putting it on hold and then releasing it that actually saves the reading. And again, here we see that once we've held it and released it, it took us from the living room floor to the living room wall. So it incremented us to the next location. Okay. Multiple readings we talked about. It's the same, same exact sequence as how we did that in the scan mode. So you can back it out as many times to take multiple readings on that one location. So I'm going to just skip over that. Okay. And then to take RH and temperature readings in the enhanced mode, the first thing you want to do is insert the sensor into the top of the meter. Select option number 3. And then you'll see that you've got your job ID, your job and your ID in the memory, plus you've got all 4 values, your RH, your temperature, your GPP, and your dew point all on screen. It also tells you the room you're in, so this just says living room. If you press select, again, it's very consistent. You press select, it'll say hold, it'll freeze that reading, and it'll also store it for you. When you press select again, it releases the meter and starts the read cycle again. So it's all the same in your scan, your pin, and your RH mode. A couple of things to keep in mind in your temperature and RH mode. The first is that the meter does not automatically advance you to the next room in the job. I don't have a good answer as to why it was handled this way. And it is one of the inconsistencies in the meter. So if you take a reading in the living room in RH and store it and release it, it's going to keep you in the living room unless you manually advance the location. This is just kind of a little pointer. Not everybody has to do it this way, but we typically recommend that when you're taking RH and temperature readings, take the ambient in the room first and then measure the output of a DQ if it's in that room. So you might have 2 living room readings, but you'll know that the first one is the ambient and the second one is the output of the DQ. To manually advance the room, it's exactly like we did before. So we're going to highlight the room, move it to the room that we want, select done, and then it brings us to our next room. Sorry about that. I'm a little dry here. Okay, so we went through how to use it as a basic meter, how to set up a job, and then how to use it in the enhanced mode. So having done that, if we had a meter in our hand, we would have some readings that are now stored in the memory of the meter itself. I only have a couple of minutes, but I want to just briefly go over the storage functions here. So from your main menu, you can choose number 5, which is your storage screen. It allows you to look at statistics, which is way overkill. I don't know of anyone that uses that. It allows you to look at your stored readings, and again, that's right on screen, or you can clear your memory or restore your defaults. Let's just take a quick look at the stored readings. If you select that, you have the option to look at pin, scan, or RH and temperature readings. So we're going to pick pin readings, and it brings up this screen. So it allows you to select the job and even the room and the grouping of the readings. So if you've got like, in this case, there's 21 readings, you can either look at readings 1 through 10 or 11 through 21. So it just kind of separates out blocks of readings that you want to look at. Once you've chosen where you want to, what you want to view, in this case, job 1 entry, click on done, and you'll get the first screen that, if you look at it from left to right, top to bottom, it tells us everything. It's job number 1, the entryway floor. This is record number 21 of 21 readings. The moisture content was 21.4%, oak, 70 degrees, the date and the time. So this allows you to scroll through each reading. So if you click on next, it'll bring you to the next reading and so forth and so on. If you're using the meter to download to the spreadsheet, the storage recall or this on-screen recall, it probably isn't going to be that useful. I do hear of people, like if a different technician goes out to the job site from one day to the next, sometimes they want to take a look at where they've left off. This is handy because they can look at the last reading. Or if you just need to recall the readings just to, again, sort of see where you're at, you do have that option to look at each reading on screen here. But again, because it will get dumped and exported to the spreadsheet, it's a little bit easier to handle it and manage the data that way. Okay, we covered all that. Clearing the memory. will erase all of your readings, but it'll keep the defined job structure intact. So just keep that in mind. Caution is you don't want to clear your memory until you've downloaded your data. Because if you clear your memory from the meter without having downloaded it, it's lost. Restoring defaults is one step further than clearing your memory. It actually will delete all the parameters in the meter. So it's going to get rid of the job structure. It'll set everything to default settings. And again, you don't want to do this until you've downloaded your data and the drying is done altogether, because restoring the defaults is irreversible. There's no going back here. So just make sure those two functions are used with some care. And finally, what we see here is the spreadsheet. So it allows you to, number one, put your logo. So every company can put their own logo in there. The fields are sortable. So once you've populated it, you can sort by job or by area, location, material, by date. These are just different ways to look at the data that's in there. But essentially, if you go across here, you'll see that it has everything that the meter has saved. The job, the ID number, the room name, the location. So it's floor, wall, ceiling, so forth. S means it's a scan reading. P means it's a pin reading. And see where it says P1, P2, and P3? Those were multiple readings on the floor in the bathroom. So that was, when I showed you how to back out the meter to the previous location, that's how it shows up on the report, as a sub-location. So it tells you everything else, the material that you set it for, the date and the time, again, the type of reading, RH is down below, and then your values, your moisture content, your RH, your temperature, your dew point, and your GPP. So this is a nice management tool from a sorting capability, because you can really view it in different ways, but ultimately this report can be submitted as part of the claim because all of the moisture readings are there. We're right at 2 o'clock, and the other items that I have here are not that important to the operation of the meter. So I think I'm going to skip them and ask Taylor